Hey everybody, how's it going? My lights are not quite the way they're supposed to be. So hopefully in a couple minutes, or maybe not. Always something. It's just not there. It was there. Well, I guess it doesn't really matter. Thanks, Ben. Hope everybody is doing well tonight. Hey, Jeff, I'm doing okay. How are you doing? Never even occurred to me to check my lights because they have never not worked. Hey, Misty, glad to see you and your mom. Yeah, I have two lights. One of them's on, one of them's not. See, that's dark. That's half light. And I don't understand why the other light is not working. This is not rocket science. Well, we'll just do it like this today then. Okay, get a little reflection off my glasses and halo on my bald spot. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. And this will work. Cynthia, how you doing? Good to see you. Oh, that was 14 days ago. Cynthia might not be here. Hey, Jill. How's it going? Yeah, this is just crazy. I mean, it's just a light that connects to my Wi-Fi, which has not changed in a very long time. Yeah, Cynthia's here. Good to see you. Okay, well, I wonder if I should be able to manually just make it stay on. Oh well. All right, we are looking at Maccabees. Hey, Jennifer, good to see you tonight. We are on First Maccabees, which is sort of the. Oh, hang on. Okay, well, evidently it's broken. That would explain why it doesn't work. We are looking at like 30 seconds. And there we are. Alrighty. For the last time, not the last time, but last time tonight, we are looking at First Maccabees, and then we're going to look at Second Maccabees when we're done with the first one. The first one is the Maccabean Revolution with the historical point of view, and 2 Maccabees is going to be the same story, the story about the Maccabean Revolution with the theological emphasis. So there's very little point in trying to dig into super deep theology and something that was written to be a mostly historical account. That doesn't mean that we don't find things that I want to point out. I really want to work on things like cyclical nature of the Israelites and their plight. When those things pop up, I like to mention that. But that's what we're doing. If you want to pull out your Bible or get it online, I'll give you a link for online in just a second. We are on chapter 3, verse 38. Let me find... get the right version. There we are. All right, I'll drop this in the chat. I think that will work. So you can click that and you'll get to where we're at. And this is really loud. There we go. We are on verse 38. Everybody ready? Ben's Christmas plant is blooming after a 2.5-year wait. Well, that's good. Better late than never. Nothing wrong with being a late bloomer. Hey, Debbie. I don't think I said hi to you. Good to see you. Misty and Jimmy, Susan Sutherland, Cheryl. Anyone else lurking in the shadows? I apologize for the slow start this morning. Technology. I'm going to be one of those people someday who doesn't know how to use technology. I have to ask my kids to come help me do things. All right, here we go. All right, give you a little bit of context. We'll start at 32. He left Lysias, a distinguished man of royal lineage, in charge of the king's affairs from the river Euphrates to the borders of Egypt. Lysias was also to take care of his son Antiochus until he returned. And he turned over to Lysias half of his forces and the elephants and gave him orders about all that he wanted done. As for the residents of Judea and Jerusalem, Lysias was to send a force against them to wipe out and destroy the strength of Israel and the remnant of Jerusalem. And we did talk quite a bit about the remnant. That's the story of the Israelites in the Old Testament, is the story of the remnant. He was to banish the memory of them from the place, settle strangers in all their territory, and distribute their land by lot. The king took the remaining half of his forces and left Antioch, his capital, in the 147th year. He crossed the Euphrates River and went through the upper provinces. Now we are moving forward with verse 38. Lysias chose Ptolemy, I'm assuming that's how you pronounce that, son of Dorimenes, and Nicanor, and Gorgias. I don't know how to say that name. Gorgias, probably. Able men among the friends of the king. And he sent with them 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry to go into the land of Judah and destroy it, as the king had commanded. So they set out with their entire force, and when they arrived, they encamped near Emmaus in the plain. When the traders of the region heard what was said to them, they took silver and gold in immense amounts and fetters and went to the camp to get the Israelites for slaves. And forces from Syria and the land of the Philistines joined with them. So everyone knew what was going to happen. They thought they knew what was going to happen. They knew the attack was going to happen, and they figured the Israelites would be captured, and that they could buy some Israelite slaves. That was their goal. Now Judas and his brothers saw that misfortunes had increased, and that the forces were encamped in their own territory. They also learned what the king had commanded to do to the people to cause their final destruction. But they said to one another, "Hey, Sue from St. Jomo, good to see you." They said to one another, "Let us restore the ruins of our people and fight for our people and the sanctuary." So remember, the enemies of Israel defiled the sanctuary. So the congregation assembled to be ready for battle and to pray and ask for mercy and compassion. That's what I want my congregation to do. I want them to assemble and be ready for battle and to pray and ask for mercy and compassion. And then we have a little bit of a poem here. And as I've said, and I know you remember, when we come to things in the Bible that are set out like this, these are songs that they sang. They're probably word for word, obviously a translation, but word for word, these did not change in the retellings of these stories. Jerusalem was uninhabited like a wilderness. Not one of her children went in or out. The sanctuary was trampled down, and strangers held the citadel. It was a lodging place for the nations. Joy was taken from Jacob. The flute and the harp ceased to play. So you can kind of tell where they're at in the story. There's a really good book called Save the Cat, written by Blake Snyder, who was really an expert screenplay writer. I think his biggest movie, it would have been a kids movie. Probably nobody here would have seen it. No, he's actually done quite a few things, but the one I'm thinking of is Blank Check. That was a very early movie, 1994. Anyway, to get back off of the tangent that I'm on, he has a where he talks about the beats of a successful screenplay. And anytime you're watching, maybe not your Oscar nominees, but your typical, feel good summer blockbuster kind of movies, they really do follow these beats. And you get to a point 2/3 of the way through what you call the all is lost moment. And that's kind of this little poem that we just read is the all is lost moment. Then they gathered together and went to Mizpah, opposite Jerusalem, because Israel formerly had a place of prayer in Mizpah. They fasted that day, put on sackcloth, and sprinkled ashes on their heads, and tore their clothes. And they opened the book of the law to inquire into those matters about which nations consulted the likenesses of their gods. They also brought the vestments of the priesthood, and the firstfruits, and the tithes, and they stirred up the Nazarites who had completed their days. You guys remember who the Nazarites were? Who's the most famous Nazarite that we would know? Anybody know? I bet Ben knows. My money's on Ben. I have been a Nazarite since birth. Not me. In fact, I wouldn't qualify because one of the things that Nazarites are not allowed to do is cut their hair. Anybody have a guess now? There you go, Ben. I knew you'd get it. Samson was the most famous Nazarite. So you can kind of get an idea. They sort of were the ultimate soldiers of their area, powered by blessings from God for the three things that they never did. They never cut their hair. They never had strong drink, any kind of strong liquor. And they never touched a dead body. Those were the three things that they couldn't do, which is interesting because Samson did all those things. Anyway, they cried aloud to heaven, saying, and now we have another little poem, "What shall we do with these? Where shall we take them? Your sanctuary is trampled down and profaned, and your priests mourn in humiliation. Here the nations are assembled against us to destroy us. You know what they plot against us. How will we be able to withstand them if you do not help us?" So this is definitely a lament. And this is what laments do. They turn around and essentially say, the rest of this lament would be something like, "Yet we know you have helped us every time in the past, and we believe that you will help us now." And that would be the format of a lament. Then they sounded the trumpets and gave a loud shout. After this, Judas appointed leaders of the people in charge of thousands and hundreds and fifties and tens. Those who were building houses or were about to be married or were planting a vineyard or were faint-hearted, he told to go home, according to the law. Then the army marched out and encamped to the south of Emmaus. And Judas said, "Arm yourselves and be courageous. Be ready early in the morning to fight with these nations who have assembled against us to destroy us and our sanctuary. It is better for us to die in battle than to see the misfortunes of our nation and of the sanctuary. But as his will in heaven may be, so shall he do." And that takes us to chapter 4, the battle at Emmaus. Now Gorgias took 5,000 infantry and 1,000 picked cavalry, and this division moved out by night to fall upon the camp of the Jews and attack them suddenly, so sneak attack. Men from the citadel were her guides. But Judas heard of it, and he and his warriors moved out to attack the king's force in Emmaus while the division was still absent from the camp. When Gorgias entered the camp of Judas by night, he found no one there. So he looked for them up in the hills because he said, "These men are running away from us." At daybreak, Judas appeared in the plain with 3,000 men, but they didn't have armor and swords such as they desired. And they saw the camp of the nation, strong and fortified with cavalry all around it, and these men were trained in war. But Judas said to those who were with him, "Do not fear their numbers, or be afraid when they charge. Remember how our ancestors were saved at the Red Sea, when Pharaoh with his forces pursued them. And now let us cry to heaven to see whether he will favor us, and remember his covenant with our ancestors, and crush this army before us today. Then all the nations will know that there is one who redeems and saves Israel." When the foreigners looked up and saw them coming against them, they went out from their camp to battle. Then the men with Judas blew their trumpets and engaged in battle. The nations were crushed and fled into the plain, and all those in the rear fell by the sword. They pursued them to Gazara and to the plains of Idumea and Azotus and Jamnia, and 3,000 of them fell. Then Judas and his force turned back from pursuing them, and he said to the people, "Do not be greedy for plunder. There's a battle before us. Gorgias and his force are near us in the hills, but stand now against our enemies and fight them, and afterward seize the plunder boldly." Very good planning, right? This is Judas. This is what he was tasked to do. So this is Judas Maccabeus. Just as Judas was finishing this speech, a detachment appeared coming out of the hills. They saw that their army had been put to flight and that the Jews were burning the camp, for the smoke that was seen showed what had happened. When they perceived this, they were greatly frightened. And when they also saw the army of Judas draw up in the plain for battle, they all fled into the land of the Philistines. Then Judas returned to plunder the camp, and they seized a great amount of gold and silver, and and cloth dyed blue and sea purple and great riches. That's so interesting. I'm sure that you're aware or have heard, remember, blue dyes were the most expensive. And so that's blue was often a color for royalty or the wealthy. In fact, at Christmas time, we used to use purple, but that was never quite accurate. Blue is a much better color. Blue, even purple. I mean, it says right here, blue and sea purple. But that is because Christ is king, and that's what we celebrate at Christmas time. So that's why that's the liturgical color. So gold and silver, and right up there was cloth dyed blue and sea purple in great riches. On their return, they sang hymns and praises to heaven, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Thus Israel had a great deliverance that day. That is, I am relatively certain, a psalm, which would be a song they would sing, isn't it? Psalm 118. Okay. Verse 26. Those of the foreigners who escaped went and reported to Lysias all that had happened. When he heard it, he was perplexed and discouraged, for things had not happened to Israel as he had intended. Well, understatement. Nor had they turned out as the king had ordered. Even worse. But the next year he mustered 60,000 picked infantry and 5,000 cavalry to subdue them. They came into Idumea and encamped at Bethzur, and Judas met them with 10,000 men. So again, the story of Israel, at least, the stories that are told, is always of a smaller force conquering a larger force. That is a theme. Julius was very excited about it. When he saw that their army was strong, he prayed. Judas met them with 10,000 men. When he saw that their army was strong, he prayed, saying, Blessed are you, O Savior of Israel, who crushed the attack of the mighty warrior by the hand of your servant David, and gave the camp of the Philistines into the hands of Jonathan, son of Saul, and of the man who carried his armor. Him and this army by the hand of your people Israel, and let them be ashamed for their troops and their cavalry. Fill them with cowardice, melt the boldness of their strength, let them tremble in their destruction. Strike them down with the sword of those who love you, and let all who know your name praise you with hymns. Kind of gets your blood pumped up, doesn't it? Then both sides attacked, and there fell the army of Lysias, 5,000 men. They fell before them. When, I don't know if it's Lysias or Lysias, when Lysias saw the rout of his troops and observed the boldness that inspired those of Judas and how ready they were to either live or to die nobly, he withdrew to Antioch and enlisted mercenaries in order to invade Judea again and with an even larger army. So what has happened? What has happened is they came with overwhelming numbers, and the men of Israel, Judah and Jerusalem, were too much for them. So they came. Just a minute. I have to lock the dogs down. Come on. Sophie can jump up on our bed, which is very high, and she can jump up on the chair, but she thinks she can't, so she wants a spotter. So she'll whine and cry until we go over and stand by her, and then she'll jump up. She's like, look at me, look at me, look at me. So they brought out more people, and now they're going to bring out even more people. And it seems to me that there are two differences that the author of this historical part, and I'm sure the theological part is going to be similar, but there's two main differences that they want to make sure that we understand. The first is that numbers are not as important as the hearts of those who fight. And the second is, when you're willing to die for a cause, you are much greater in strength than one who is merely willing to live for a cause. And then, of course, the third would be that with God, all things are possible. Then Judas and his brother said, See, our enemies are crushed. Let us go to cleanse the sanctuary and dedicate it. So all the army assembled and went up to Mount Zion. There they saw the sanctuary desolate, the altar profaned, and the gates burned. In the courts they saw the bushes sprung up as in a thicket or as one of the mountains. They also saw the chambers of the priests in ruins. Then they tore their clothes and mourned with great lamentation. They sprinkled themselves with ashes and fell face down on the ground, and they blew the signal trumpets, and they cried out to heaven. Then Judas detailed men to fight against those in the citadel until he had cleansed the sanctuary. He chose blameless priests devoted to the law, and they cleansed the sanctuary and removed the defiled stones to an unclean place. They deliberated about what to do about the altar of burnt offering, which had also been profaned. They thought it best to tear it down so that it would not be a lasting shame to them that the nations had defiled it. So they tore down the altar and stored the stones in a convenient place on the temple hill until a prophet should come and tell them what to do with them. Then they took unhewn stones, as the law directs, and built a new altar like the former one. They also rebuilt the sanctuary and the interior of the temple and consecrated the courts. They made new holy vessels and brought the lampstand, the altar of the incense, and the table into the temple. Then they offered incense on the altar and lit the lamps of the lampstand, and these gave light in the temple. They placed the bread on the table and hung up the curtains. Thus, they finished all the work they had undertaken. Perhaps a lesson to learn just from this small section of the story is that sometimes it's better just to tear things down and start over than it is to try to fix what's gone wrong. Early in the morning on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is the month of Chislev in the 148th year, they rose and offered sacrifice as the law directs on the new altar of burnt offering that they had built. At the very season and on the very day that the nations had profaned it, it was dedicated with songs and harps and lutes and cymbals. All the people fell on their faces and worshipped and blessed heaven, who had prospered them. So they celebrated the dedication of the altar for 8 days. And they offered a sacrifice of well-being and a thanksgiving offering. They decorated the front of the temple with golden crowns and small shields. They restored the gates and the chambers for the priests and fitted them with doors. There was very great joy among the people, and the disgrace bought by the nations was removed. And this is Hanukkah. The word means dedication. I wondered what the literal translation of the word Hanukkah was. It was dedication. So for those 8 days, they celebrated the rededication of the altar. And it's celebrated yet today. Then Judas and his brothers and all the assembly of Israel had determined that every year, at that season of the days of dedication of altar should be observed with joy and gladness for 8 days, beginning with the 25th day of the month of Chislev. At that time, they fortified Mount Zion with high walls and strong towers all around to keep the nations from coming and trampling them as they had done before. Judas stationed a garrison there to guard it. He also fortified Beth Zur to guard it, so that the people might have a stronghold that faced Idumea. I want to look something up. Okay. I was looking, obviously, at being on the 25th day of the month, a different calendar, but it makes you wonder if the day that Christmas was selected to be celebrated, if that's a coincidence or not. And it appears that we don't know for sure. But, and this probably will be no surprise, I'll quote this directly. Some scholars note that the early Christians may have intentionally chosen December 25th to coincide with pre-existing winter festivals, including Hanukkah and pagan solstice celebrations, as a way to provide meaning to Christian worship during that time. I preached about this at Christmas time, and why I think that strong, mature Christians should not be upset when somebody says happy holidays during Christmas time, and why you should not be embarrassed to say Merry Christmas during Christmas time. If somebody came up to you and wished you a happy Hanukkah, that would be they would be celebrating their joy with you. And most reasonable, well, all reasonable people, depending on, I guess, your definition of reasonable, would not be bothered by being wished a Merry Christmas. And I like this idea, this admission, because what you hear people say all the time is, "Oh, it was just a pagan holiday. That's, it's not really Christ's birthday. It's just a pagan holiday," and that very well could be the case. Probably is the case, but it was an intentional choice to give Christians a season of celebration so that people could celebrate together. So why not? We have all these things that coincide around Christmas time. Why not all celebrate together? Why focus on the things that make us different and the things that divide us when they're not, they're not things that need to keep us separate? My opinion. Or as my Old Testament professor at SMU would say, in my humble and accurate opinion. Okay. On to chapter 5. I want to look at one. Okay. Okay. Chapter 5. When the nations all around heard that the altar had been rebuilt and the sanctuary dedicated as it was before, they became very angry. And they determined to destroy the descendants of Jacob who lived among them. So they began to kill and destroy among the people. But Judas made war on the descendants of Esau and Idumea. We will talk more about that when we get to the theological aspect of the story of the Maccabean Revolution. But that is fascinating. Judas made war on the descendants of Esau at Idumea, at Acrabatim, because they kept lying in wait for Israel. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it moving, and when we get to Second Maccabees, we'll slow down a lot. He dealt them a heavy blow and humbled them and despoiled them. He also remembered the wickedness of the sons of, we'll call that Beon, who were a trap and a snare to the people and ambushed them on the highways. They were shut up by him in towers, and he encamped against them, vowed their complete destruction, and burned with fire their towers and all who were in them. Is what it is, huh? Then he crossed over to attack the Ammonites, where he found a strong band and many people with Timothy as their leader. He engaged in many battles with them, and they were crushed before him. He struck them down. He also took Jazer and its villages, and then he returned to Judea. Now the nations in Gilead gathered together, and keep in mind every time we hear the word nations, we're talking about the enemies of Israel. The nations in Gilead gathered together against the Israelites who lived in their territory and planned to destroy them. But they fled to the stronghold of Dathema and sent Judas and his brothers letters that said, "The nations around us have gathered to destroy us. They're preparing to come and capture the stronghold to which we have fled, and Timothy is leading their forces. Now then, come and rescue us, from their hands, for many of us have fallen." and all our kindred who were in the land of Tobias have been killed. The enemy have captured their wives and children and goods and have destroyed about 1,000 persons there. It's a little letter telling them what was going on. While the letters were still being read, other messengers with their garments torn came from Galilee and made a similar report. They said that the people of Ptolemais and Tyre and Sidon and all of Galilee of the Gentiles had gathered together against them, quote unquote, to annihilate us. When Judas and the people heard these messages, a great assembly was called to determine what they should do for their kindred who were in distress and being attacked by enemies. Then Judas said to his brother Simon, "Choose your men. Let's go and rescue your kindred in Galilee. Jonathan, my brother, and I will go to Gilead." But he left Joseph, son of Zechariah, and Azariah, leader of the people, with the rest of the forces in Judea to guard it. And he gave them this command: "Take charge of this people, but do not engage in battle with the nations until we return." Then 3,000 men were assigned to Simon to go to Galilee, and 8,000 to Judas for Gilead. So Simon went to Galilee and fought many battles against the nations, and the nations were crushed before him. He pursued them to the gates. Okay, hold on a second. I'm going to find out how to pronounce this word. Ptolemais. Okay. Ptolemais. He pursued them to the gates of Ptolemais. As many as 3,000 of the nations fell, and he despoiled them. Then he took the Jews of Galilee and Arabah with their wives and children and all they possessed, and led them to Judea with great rejoicing. Judas Maccabeus and his brother Jonathan crossed the Jordan and made 3 days' journey into the wilderness. They encountered the Nabateans, who met them peaceably and told them all that happened to their kindred in Gilead. Many of them had been shut up in Bozrah and Bezor, and Alima and Kospho, Maked, and Karnaim. All of these towns were strong and large, and some have been shut up in other towns of Gilead. The enemy, word is that translated at? Just they, okay. They are getting ready to attack the strongholds tomorrow and capture and destroy all of these people in a single day. Then Judas and his army quickly turned back by the wilderness road to Bozrah, and he took the town and killed every male by the edge of the sword. Then he seized all its spoils and burned it with fire. He left the place at night, and they went all the way to the stronghold of Dothama. At dawn they looked out and saw a large company, which could not be counted, carrying ladders and engines of war to capture the stronghold and attacking the Jews within. So Judas saw that the battle had begun, and that the cry of the town went up to heaven with trumpets and loud shouts. And he said to the men of his forces, "Fight today for your kindred." Then he came up behind them in 3 companies, who surrounded their trumpets and cried out aloud in prayer. And when the army of Timothy realized that it was Maccabeus, they fled before him, and he dealt them a heavy blow. As many as 8,000 of them fell that day. Notice another important fact that the author of this wants us to know every time is that almost every battle mentioned begins with prayer. I don't know what battles you are fighting today, but whatever they are, you should begin them with prayer. Next, he turned to Mathah and fought against it and took it, and he killed every male in it, plundered, burned it with fire. From there he marched on and took Kospho, Maked, and Bezor, and the other towns of Gilead. After these things, Timothy gathered another army and encamped opposite Raphon on the other side of the stream. Judas sent men to spy out the camp, and they reported to him, "All the nations around us have gathered to him. It's a very large force." They've also hired Arabs to help them, and they are encamped across the stream ready to come and fight against you. And Judas went to meet them. Now, as Judas and his army drew near to the stream of water, Timothy said to the officers of his forces, "If he crosses over to us first, we'll not be able to resist him, for he will surely defeat us. But if he shows fear and camps on the other side of the river, we'll cross over to him and defeat him." When Judas approached the stream of the water, he stationed the officers of the army at the stream and gave them this command: permit no one to encamp, but make them all enter the battle. Then he crossed over against them first, and the whole army followed him. All the nations were defeated before him, and they threw away their arms and fled into the sacred precincts at Karnaim. But he took the town and burned the sacred precincts with fire, together with all who were with him in them. Thus Karnaim was conquered, and they could stand before Judas no longer. All right, I'm going to read from 45 to 54, and that's going to be it for tonight. And then Judas gathered together all the Israelites in Gilead, the small and the great, with their wives and children and goods, a very large company, to go to the land of Judah. So they came to Ephron. This was a large and very strong town on the road, and they couldn't go around it to the left or the right. They had to go through it. But the people of the town shut them out and blocked up the gates with stones. Judas sent them a friendly message: let us pass through your land to get to our land. No one will do you harm. We'll simply pass by on foot. But they refused to open to him. Then Judas ordered proclamation to be made to the army that all should encamp where they were. So the men of the forces encamped, and he fought against the town all that day and all the night, and the town was delivered into his hands. This is the theme, right? He destroyed every male by the edge of the sword and razed and plundered the town. He burned it with fire. That's what we've read over and over again. He passed through the town over the bodies of the dead. Then they crossed the Jordan into the large plain before Bethshan. Judas kept rallying the laggards and encouraging all the people all the way until he came to the land of Judah. So they went up to Mount Zion with joy and gladness and offered burnt offerings, because they had returned in safety. Not one of them had fallen. You'll give me a minute. I want to talk about one thing. We are chapter 5, verse 55. That should be pretty easy to remember. We'll talk about it next time. I'm going to give you a little context next time. So next week, we're going to talk about this town that was given the peaceful option of simply letting them come through because they had no other route to make it. And they chose violence. The Israelites didn't choose violence. Violence was chosen. And they answered it. But we'll talk about that next time. So that is most of the 5th chapter of Maccabeus. And we still have quite a few more. Okay, 12. It's 12 chapters altogether. So, couple months before we get through this, and then we'll spend at least twice as much time, even though 2nd Maccabees is shorter than 1st. We'll spend more time on it because that's when we're going to get to the theological things, and that, of course, is what I'm in this for. It is sad, isn't it? It's also very, very violent. They didn't just defeat these armies. They, according to the historical scripture, if you can call it that, which I think you can, they killed every male and they burned the cities. They razed them to the ground. That is a very strong statement. So we'll talk about that next time too. We'll talk about the strength of the defeat, why the Bible says the things that it says, and we'll talk about this town that chose violence. Yeah, Ben, it really does, and that's just such a a common theme throughout history are small numbers of men defeating larger numbers of men, or holding them off for long enough for some goal. Everyone loves an underdog, right? Except for the Kansas City Chiefs. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll see you again next Tuesday. I hope to see most of you in church on Sunday. And I guess that's it. So God bless, Godspeed, and as always, thanks for watching.